Welcome to a special edition of The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. This week, we focus on SBM's Intelligence latest report, Nigeria's 2027, How the Country May Vote, Voter Sentiment Tracker, Wave 1 Analysis. This report provides an early snapshot on voters' sentiment ahead of the 2027 elections, revealing widespread dissatisfaction with the country's direction, strong support for political change, and significant regional differences in voters' preferences. It highlights the importance of voter turnout, identifies the Southwest as a key battleground region, and shows that economic hardship and insecurity remains the issue that matters most for Nigerians. This report also raises concerns about the growing influence of social media, misinformation, and AI-generated content on the electoral process. Joining us today to discuss the report's key findings and what they mean for Nigeria's political future is Ekemese Effiong, partner at SBM Intelligence. Welcome, Ekemese, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Veronica.
It's been a while since.
Yeah.
It's been a while since.
First time this year.
I know. I mean, it's interesting to have you. Let's begin. What is the voter sentiment tracker, and why did SBM Intelligence decide to launch this a few months to the 2027 elections?
So we conducted a series of surveys across Nigeria's 6 geopolitical zones, right? And we think it's useful to gauge the electoral sentiments among potential voters. Obviously, the biggest and hottest topic of discussion, right, in Nigeria at the moment, apart from, unfortunately, the security situation in the country, is obviously the 2027 elections, which are occurring, I believe, in late January next year. And there's a lot of analysis, developments, people flying around, people jumping from one political affiliation to the other, primaries going on, INEC busy and having its hands full while all of this is happening. We thought it was useful to also get a sense quantitatively of what Nigerians generally think about the elections, the issues that are likely to shape the outcomes of the vote next year, what they think of the main political players, obviously including but not just related to the president alone, and what they think about the overall direction that the country is taking. So we just felt it's useful to, and then what we also want to accomplish with the voter sentiment tracker, right, is to, on a fairly regular basis, track and map the change and shift in sentiments as political developments, right, go on, right. A political party may be in the ascendancy, someone breaks out or breaks away, or there's a breakaway faction, and that may color, right, voter sentiment. Obviously, voter perception of INEC's performance or likely performance in the 2027 election is likely to be a fluid situation, right? So tracking those changes, obviously, as we go through the primary season into the the wider nomination season as well, and just seeing how voter sentiment is shifting. That's really what we want to accomplish with the voter sentiment tracker.
I mean, it's really important, and I see like the key things that it will put, especially going towards the election. And I mean, just trying to see how voter sentiments change as well. It's really important to the democratic process and the voting process as well, because then it allows for people to see how people are changing the political party movement. But it also give a feel to how voters feel. And I think that by the next one, we'll be able to also tell the difference by having the data being analyzed as well. I mean, what would you say is the single most important? I know there were so many important takeaways from this report, but
Yeah.
what would you say is the single most important takeaway, especially from this first wave?
Yeah, I think it's just the sense that Nigerians just have about the overall direction of their country. So nearly 80% of Nigerians, or at least the Nigerians that we spoke to for the survey, say that the country is headed in the wrong direction. That's an overwhelming vote of no confidence in the current administration. One of the things that we also did, right, with the voter sentiment tracker, right, was to track net favorability ratings, right? So we basically asked Nigerians to rate the performance not just of the president but also of some of the key political figures that are shaping this particular election cycle, and basically the ratio of positive sentiments to negative sentiments constitutes the net favorability rating, and the president's net favorability ratings are abysmal to say the least. He's at like minus 58.5, right?
Wow.
On a
Wow.
oh yeah, on a 100 to minus 100 scale,
Wow.
right? In that sense. So I think that was sort of also the second key learning, which tracks closely when you have a situation where an overwhelming majority of voters think that the country is not headed in the right direction. You also have a situation where the NDC, which seems to be shaping up as the primary political opposition force in this cycle, especially in light of the collapse of the grand efforts to get the opposition united to challenge the ruling APC. 57.4% of our respondents generally see the NDC favorably. It may have to do a lot less with the NDC's own platform, right, in and of itself, and more to do with the fact that the APC is just not well regarded. Only 11.3% of our respondents rated the APC favorably, right? And just to give you context to that, another 11.3% of our respondents are undecided on which political party they like, right? So the undecided proportion of our respondents pool is like for like with those who think that the APC is doing a decent job. The ADC is at 10.3, the PDP is basically a rounding error, right? At this point. Another key one, and I think this is probably where I would leave it for the time being, is the turnout intention. So we asked likely voters how likely are they to actually come out, right, and vote. And on a geopolitical zone basis, the findings were quite interesting. So it appears as though a lot of people in the southeast and the south say that they are really, really motivated to come out and vote, right? This time around, you're looking at 87% for the southeast, 82% for the south, 82% too in the northwest, and this closely tracks with where we are seeing new PVC registration figures, right, from INEC, right? Tally, these are the states where new PVC registrations, right, have been the most robust. By contrast, the southwest, which those of you who know your political geography, right, is the home region of the president, as well as the northeast, have the both the lowest voter intentions and also weaker registration rates. So only 14.8% of respondents in the southwest say that they are new voters, right? So they just got their PVCs for the first time during this cycle, right? And 38.5% of those in the northeast, right, said that. Now, considering that, if you map that to the recent electoral results, right, on the geopolitical zone basis, the southwest and the northeast have largely been the most competitive. They've seen the most swings, right, from party to party, and then even during the life cycle of the current president's first term, you've seen a fair amount of states, right, in other parts of the country, but also a couple in this region, right, also flip into the president's column. These two zones, to our minds, represent the most competitive. And then the southwest also has a very large proportion of undecided voters, about 23%, so almost more than 1 in 4 right? Potential Southwest voters. And also from our data, the Northeast has like an almost even three-way split between the NDC, the APC, and the ADC, right? Sorry, a lot of letters in there, right? I think those two regions, the Southwest and the Northeast, look like they are going to be the most competitive, right, within this election cycle.
Those are interesting figures. I'd like to dive a little bit, but just this question, which I feel is important. I mean, the last elections we saw a lot of people come out to vote, as opposed to previous elections. Do you think we're going to see more voters, especially as you're saying, we're seeing new people coming in to register? There's a new pool of voters coming into the poll. Do you think we are going to see a higher number of votes in this election?
Well, the official turnout figures do not necessarily support the premise of your question, but anecdotally, it appeared as though there were a lot more people were a lot more motivated to come out and vote during the 2023 election cycle. We also know there was a fair amount of institutional and organizational disenfranchisement, right? Many ballots didn't get to certain areas. Counting was haphazard in many parts of the country. Electoral transmission, which were promised as a result of the introduction of the of beavers, right, did not pan out, right, as INEC had promised, right. So there was a lot of institutional disenfranchisement. I haven't seen much to suggest that a lot of that will change in this cycle, but there seems to be a lot of anger and frustration, right, amongst Nigerians generally, and that generally is a prime motivator for people to come out and vote. So I suppose it's a wait and see thing. This is the first VST. It will be interesting to see if those voter intention figures change and swing substantially, right? Either towards a high turnout scenario or a lower turnout scenario. And that's why we created the VST, so that we can track this.
I mean, yeah. The report also suggests that Peter Obi currently enjoys the strongest favorability rating among the leading political figures surveyed. What factors do you think are driving this sentiment?
Okay, so just to sort of give you the general numbers amongst sort of the main figures whose names have been flying all over the ether, right, in this particular election cycle. So Peter Obi is the only candidate that has a positive net score, right? His net favorability rating is at plus 58.3. He's followed by Rabiu Kwankwaso, right, who has a minus 21.6. So still a negative net favorability rating, but not as worse as some of the others, as you see. Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar has a net favorability rating of minus 31.8. Former Rivers Governor and Federal Transport Minister Rotimi Amechi has a net favorability score of minus 46.7, and obviously the president has the worst. I said obviously, like that was intuitive, but the president has a net score of minus 58.5. And what's really driving, right, especially the downward pressure on the favorability ratings of all of the other candidates is one, they are seen as more establishment, right? In that sense, obviously, if you're the president, you don't get more establishment than that, right? In that sense. But then, if you look at sort of the president, particularly his average performance on 5 key policy issues: inflation, taxation, security, jobs, and power, he scores on a 1 to 5 scale on a lot of those scores. If you look at them on a regional basis, really below 2 in a lot of on a lot of those key items. And so Peter Obi is still, even after the experience of almost 4 years on from 2023 and the likes, is still largely seen by a plurality of Nigerians as the person who's more likely to turn the country around, right? In that sense, and because he's the least plugged in to the current administration, right? He's largely seen. And I also think one of the things, okay, this is less of an this is less of an issue, right, with Rabiu Kwankwaso, right, because Peter Obi and Rabiu Kwankwaso are former state governors, right? Rabiu of Kano, Peter of Anambra. But the fact that they haven't been part of federal administrations, I think, is something that Nigerians are discounting in their favor, right? They were largely seen as mostly effective state governors. They left office, riding a high wave of popularity. They are still largely seen favorably by residents of their own states, and because they don't have a national governing track record in that sense, unlike the president, unlike Amici that was part of the last federal cabinet, and unlike Atiku that was part obviously of Nigeria's first post-military democratic governance. People don't see them as part of the people that has put Nigeria where it is
right now.
Yes, so in that sense, that's why their scores are a lot better than their competitors.
So the report also indicates that there's a significant dissatisfaction with President Tinubu's administration. How much of this appears to be driven by economic concerns versus security concerns, or is it both?
It is both. It is both, right? Yeah. So the general received wisdom was that the president coming from a state, obviously the largest state economy, right, in the country, Lagos, having that track record, right, was going to do something of a better job, right, on the economy, right, and that hasn't really panned out. But it's really insecurity that has been the driver, right, of the issues that Nigerians seem to be having with the president. If you look at the president's rating on a 1 to 5 scale, right, in every geopolitical zone, the zone where he scores the highest is the Northwest, but it's at a 2.02. So in every other region, he scores less than 2 on a 1 to 5 scale, which is really abysmal. And if you look at the top issues that Nigerians are concerned about, security is the overwhelming one. Then the economy and insecurity, right, accounts for, and like insecurity accounts for like almost half, right, of sort of Nigeria. Practically half of Nigerians say that insecurity is their dominant concern and is the dominant issue that they have with the president. The economy and insecurity is second with a 34% score, and then the economy alone, right, has scores a 13% in that light. So if you combine insecurity as a standalone and the economy and insecurity, right, and then you add the economy by itself, it's something like almost 90%, right, of Nigerians think that the president isn't doing favorably on any of those indicators. And so both of those things are weighing him down significantly, right, in the minds of likely voters.
So right now, INEC is doing their third phase of their continuous voters registration, and in 30 days that is going to come to an end. But we're also seeing a wave of Nigerians questioning and calling out people to go and register, take part in this continuous voters registration. One of the report's key findings is that turnout could determine the outcome of the 2027 elections. Why is it voter mobilization likely to be more important than persuasion?
Yeah, because turnout generally, historically, not just in Nigeria but globally, tends to favor the political competition, right, over incumbents. People are often more motivated to vote out candidates than to retain incumbents, right, in that sense. And so what we are seeing is that the zones that have the most post 2023 PVC registrations, right, according to our data, the South, the Northeast, right, and the Southeast are also showing the highest turnout intentions. Now, this by no means is a prophetic indication that this is what will actually happen, but this is what people are saying they are likely to do. And this is a snapshot as at the data was gathered in late April into May, right, of this year. So that's an additional sort of statistical disclaimer that that you need to have, right, when looking at the numbers. But if you combine those figures, if you look at those figures with the states, with the regions where the president is doing the worst, right? So in the southeast, the president's net rating is a 1.14 out of 5. In the south is a 1.71. It's only in the northwest that the president does relatively, and relatively is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, right? A 2.02. So if you combine rank unpopularity in the parts of the country that are picking up the most PVCs comparatively on average and are expressing the highest possibility, right, of coming out to vote, it creates a scenario where in a high turnout situation, the opposition does really, really well. Obviously, Nigeria being Nigeria, right, elections are not free, fair, impartial. I think no one should pretend otherwise. And so, yeah, there are other factors, right, that will come into play. But if we're simply looking at what voters are saying they are likely to do and pairing it with their concerns about the state of the economy, right, this looks good for the opposition.
The Southwest is described as the pivotal swing region, which makes the region so politically important. And what should we watch out for over the next few months?
I think statistically we should watch out for new PVC registrations. So the Southwest is underperforming the rest of the country, right? Only 14.8% of our respondents said since 2023 they have picked up, new PVCs, right? Which is the lowest in the country. The next closest region is the Northwest at 18.6%. You also want to watch out for whether the turnout intentions, right, amongst voters in the Southwest picks up. Right now is at a 44%, right? Only the Northeast scores below 50%, right? Of all of Nigeria's, only the Northeast scores 50%, right? Along with the Southwest of all of the 6 geopolitical zones in terms of, right, that sort of high turnout intention, right, that we're looking at. So those are the two things that I would sort of be watching, and I would be very, right, interested in. The president himself is not incredibly popular in the Southwest. His net rating in that region is at a 1.64, which means that a lot of the pressures that people are feeling generally around insecurity and around the economy are also prevalent, right, in the Southwest. So those are also key things to look out for. Also, according to our data right now, current vote intent, right, for the Southwest, the APC is not in the lead. Is the NDC. As a matter of fact, the NDC leads in every geopolitical zone in the country, in terms of every geopolitical zone but the Northwest, in terms of current voter intention. So it'll be interesting to see if voter intention for the NDC in the Southwest is at 45%, for the APC is at 22%. I'll be watching to see if, that proportion sort of, either increases in favor of the NDC or the APC makes something of a comeback, right, as the election season unfolds.
Insecurity and economic hardship emerged as the dominant concern for voters. I mean, we've had that conversation. Which of these issues is likely to have the greatest impact on voter behavior?
Right now, it's looking like it's insecurity. Right? Yeah. So, fully almost half of our respondents say insecurity is their dominant concern. Now, when we when we conducted the surveys in all of the geopolitical zones, the the mass school kidnapping in Oriri in Oyo State had not occurred. The one that also occurred that same week in Borno State had not occurred, right? I would imagine that this proportion will increase as we continue to talk to voters, and that sentiment comes through in subsequent editions of the VST. So I think insecurity will be the big marker right in this cycle, but it does not appear from some of the proposals that have been put on the table by the current administration that the current administration thinks that voters are likely to penalize it for its current track record on insecurity. Maybe if it's a situation where it is not a 40+% concern and it's a 70-75+% right situation, and if we also combine that with a scenario where more of these attacks unfortunately happen, then it may become, I expect it, one, to become a much more significant concern for voters. But secondly, and more importantly, right, it may be something that the politicians fighting for re-election, right, will realize that they cannot ignore anymore, or at least treat it with kids gloves.
The report also identifies a growing concern about AI-generated misinformation and deepfakes. How vulnerable is Nigerians' information environment ahead of the 2027 election? And what role do you think social media platforms now play in shaping political opinions and electoral outcomes in Nigeria?
In terms of the role that social media is playing, I think this is the first data. This is the first data set that I am looking at where Nigerians are saying for the first time, and this is across all geopolitical zones, that social media is their primary source of news. So everywhere in the country, and it's a lot more prevalent in the south. So something like 78% of respondents in the southeast, 55% of respondents in the southwest, 40% of those in the south say that social media is their primary source of news and information. And even in the north, the numbers are in the mid 40%, right? So I would be really concerned, right? And then when you pair that with the question that we asked about people being concerned about AI and deepfakes, the picture is a lot more. It's a lot more modeled. It's a lot more contextual, depending on where in the country you're in. So respondents in the north appear to have less of a concern, right, about, or extreme concern about AI and deepfakes. The exception being the northeast, where something like 36% of respondents say they are concerned. But if you come to the south, in the southwest, it's 60%. In the south and in the southeast, it's high 20s to the early 30%. Which tracks again with the rollout with internet penetration rates, right? The southwest is a lot more connected, a lot more. Also, let's not forget that we talked about the southwest being a very contested region, right, in that sense. And so it appears as though we are seeing the early stages of political misinformation, a lot of political information being superintended through the lens of artificial intelligence and deepfakes. And people are beginning to see a lot more messaging, right, with clearly AI generated or AI derived content, particularly in the southwest, but also generally in other parts of the south. And that's becoming an issue. I would expect the closer we get to the elections, the more sort of this concern would happen. We saw in the 2023 elections the early stages of AI making its entry into Nigerian politics. I think, though, that the 2027 elections will be remembered as the first proper artificial intelligence elections in Nigeria's history,
Yeah.
and not for and not for good reasons.
Yeah, so people have to be wary.
Oh, extremely.
Fact check a lot of fact checking needs to go through before swallow information you find on social media as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you look at the fact checking, if you look at the fact checking figures across all of the geopolitical zones, because we asked respondents if they verify informations, no geopolitical zone in Nigeria scored above 50%. So there was no geopolitical zone where 50% of respondents say they verify or fact check informations. The southeast was the highest at 42%, but in the north central, practically 0%. In the northeast, 5%. In the southwest, that is the region that is most concerned about AI and deepfakes, only 7% of respondents say they fact check information.
Wow, those numbers are not good.
They are not good at all.
All our listeners, you need to fact check the information you're getting, especially as we live in the AI generation, should I put it that way?
Yeah.
On to our final question. As SBM continues this tracker, what indicators will you monitor most closely in the future waves?
Voter intention. I thought I would be more impressed by the net favorability ratings of the candidates, but that may not. I don't think that's as interesting to me as voter intention, the issues that Nigerians are most concerned about, and their likelihood to turn out and vote. I would also be interested to see, I know we didn't get into it, also the perception that Nigerians have about INEC's potential performance, right, as well, and how that changes over the course of the election cycle. So those will be the four broad things that I will be watching.
I mean, now that you bring it up, do we have that conversation about INEC? What are your thoughts from the survey? What are your thoughts generally?
Yeah, we can pick it up next time, but safe to say that confidence in INEC is not sky high at all. Less than half of Nigerians
How can they correct that?
Think that, well, INEC is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, right? Because I think for a lot of Nigerians, the perception of INEC has been distastefully colored by the experience of 2023, obviously. But then we also have a situation where most Nigerians are judging and assessing INEC based off of what the politicians and the candidates, and especially those in the opposition, are saying about INEC, and less about what INEC is doing in and of itself, even though INEC has, come out and held some positions which have been, really astonishing and extraordinary, right, from a political standpoint. So it's not as though INEC is not doing a good enough job of not trying to build confidence in the minds of Nigerians. So I would be watching that closely too, because it also pairs to the voter intention question. If people think that INEC is really likely not to do a good job, it may sour expectations, but also expectations leading to people actually showing up on the day to vote.
I agree with you on that. Thank you, Nkemaset, for joining us and sharing your insights about this report.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
It was fun. It was actually fun. So our listeners, thank you for joining us for this special edition of The Week Ahead. For more research and analysis from SBM, and if you would like to read the report, which you should, visit our website sbmintel.com and ensure that you follow us all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you very much for tuning in. Until next time, have a great week.